Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, why can't the Seahawks play a normal game?
They played one normal game this year. It happened to be somehow against the Vikings. And also they lost by 2 scores.
It was, I believe that I don't even know what to say about that onside kick. Like
that was so, so obviously the game is like nutso for all kinds of reasons, right? Like the extra point fumble return, incredible, beautiful, gorgeous. Technically, the second one that's occurred since the rule, I think they said on the broadcast. I don't remember what it was, but I do remember it happening.
Well, the other time that a 2-point, well, okay, it wasn't a 2-point. It was not a 2-point conversion. This one, I remember the other 2-point conversion that got returned back, and that was the Falcons because they're the Falcons. Because they took the lead on the touchdown and they lost the lead on the extra point. Because the Falcons are not to be trusted.
See, okay, so first NFL blocked extra point field goal to be returned for 2. And then, so that was in 2015. And then there's also this video from the NFL about it happening with the Broncos, I guess. So it's happened to the Falcons, the Panthers. Holy crap. All right, so it's happened to the Panthers. It's happened to the Saints. Oh, so it's just happening to the NFC South, I guess is what I'm getting here. And Washington.
And why not? And cool. It was fun to see that was 25 points in the Hell League. I had totally forgotten that was a thing. So that
it hadn't even occurred for me to check that, but of course we have a rule about that.
Yeah. Got a lot of people with blue check marks wanting to be a part of the league next year. I'm looking forward to that. We're definitely going to open it up a little bit. I think the Hell League is still going to be invite only, just because I can't in good conscience open this up to the entire public.
No, you'd be liable. Yeah, I think for
I'm not paying for all lawsuit. Of this therapy. I'm not going on the line for it. So, but welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Hope you all are doing well despite the Vikings loss to the 49ers. We will be talking about that here in just a moment, along with an update on Dalvin Cook. But before we start, again, thank you guys so much for listening. If you enjoy the show and would like to help support us financially, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go over to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there for $3.50 a month. You get bonus content, you get bonus episodes, and this coming Sunday, if you guys want to do a Zoom watch-along for the Lions game, head on over. I'll be on. Arif might be a little bit busy, but I will be on, and we had a great time every time we've done this for the watch-along. I'll even have bingo cards for those who want to involve themselves in this. So I'll see if I can give away the Christmas gift to Dawn I bought 2 years ago that's still sitting in my garage. So somebody's going to get that. Might even be Dawn. We don't know. But point of the story is, if you'd like to do the watch along on Zoom, head over to patreon.com. $3.50 a month will get you access to everything involving bonus content and all of this. So we'll be doing that on Sunday, 11:30ish or whatever. Game's usually a noon game, so we'll plan on it for that. Central Time, obviously. Or you can go to paypal.me/NorseCode as well and donate to the show there. That's a one-time donation. Or you can be like so many amazing people and go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up your Arif gear or the Norse Code gear as well. Just as a thank you to Dusty for appearing on the show for episode 400, I wanted to get him a little gift to show our appreciation for coming on the show. So I ended up getting him a Norse Code shirt because I asked him at the very end of the show if he wanted one. And I also proceeded to send him the Christmas socks. Well, he got the Christmas socks first. And I didn't
without him knowing that this was in like the realm of possibilities.
Yeah, I didn't tell him that anything was coming. So imagine his surprise when he opened up the package and just looked at the Arethe logo on his Christmas socks, just going, the hell is this? I don't even think he knew what it was, like, right away. He obviously knew that it was your face, but it's just like, what? Why am I... What? What is... What? So, if you would like to confuse your friends and family or supporters of the show, you can do so over at norsecode.threadless.com. Before we start, just want to thank a quick Patreon subscriber. Evan Meyer says, hey guys, longtime listener and new Patreon supporter here. I just want to say thank you for the great content and for being real about our beloved and frustrating team. For James's audio and interface corner, what would you recommend for recording drum tracks? I'd like to venture into drum covers and original content for band projects, and the iPhone/iPad recordings can only give me so much clarity. Thanks again, and Skol. I'll reach out to you over on Patreon or through Patreon Messenger. Just send me a quick message. But what I will tell you is a 20-second thing here on the audio setup for our show, in which I tend to use, and for the live shows especially, I end up bringing out my Sapphire, which is a Focusrite product, which I like. It's got eight ins, 8 outs, a couple more for headphone stuff, and I end up running that into a MacBook Pro that I use Pro Tools on. I prefer Pro Tools just because that's what I learned everything on. But the show is entirely done inside of Pro Tools, but it communicates really well. It communicates really easily, and this newish, couple-year-old Mac has no problems with dealing with it. Just don't upgrade your software before you don't upgrade your iOS rather before you get the okay that Pro Tools are working in. That's the one thing I've really learned. But I would check that out. You can do anything with an SM57, but check out some of these IOs. I like a nice DAW station for like Pro Tools or whatever, but there's a million different options. But message me over on Patreon, and I will talk to you there, which is the sort of thing that you can get by subscribing over at patreon.com/NorseCode. You can ask me how to mic up a drum kit, and I can tell you if you really want to know. Or we can just, talk about Viking stuff. So, all of this aside, let's get into the actual episode itself, because there's plenty to talk about, including the Dalvin Cook injury. Now, there's some news that came out during the game tonight. So, Arif, why don't we get an update on what's going on with Dalvin Cook and his shoulder?
Yeah, well, it sounds like he had been already playing on an injured shoulder in the game. I guess he had torn his labrum, according to Ian Rappaport, if I understand his report during the game. So he dislocated his shoulder. I think it's torn labrum in now the other shoulder. And Zimmer mentioned that he was day-to-day. So I can't imagine that he'll play this next week, but it sounds like it is like primarily a pain tolerance issue. So yeah, I guess the injury isn't as significant as we thought when it happened. I know some people were speculating that it could be pectoral tear. Sounds like it wasn't. But yeah, I think that at least for one game and probably quite a bit more, the Vikings are just not going to have Dalvin Cook, but it certainly wasn't as bad, I guess, as it had initially seemed.
Well, I mean, Adam Schefter during the game had mentioned that he was expected to miss at least the next 2 games. Sunday.
Which that kind of phrasing tells you that he's not out for the season.
Yeah, which, great. Unfortunately, he's expected to be back the December 20th game for the Chicago, which, boy.
Mm-hmm.
No Vikings fan is looking forward to that game regardless. So,
yeah, take your time. Get healthy.
Stay off that field. We don't even want to look at you for the all-22 like stuff afterwards. Nobody wants to look at that all-22 anyway. But like nobody wants to deal with that anyway. Just stay home. Be well. Avoid that and FedEx Field, and we'll probably be fine. So he did get hurt. It looked worse on the field than it turned out to be. He had he had both teams kind of sitting and waiting and kneeling for him. So that was a scary little moment. But let's get into the 49ers game itself, because we have to, because of obligation. This did not There have been so many Vikings losses this year that have been incredibly frustrating that it is really stretching my ability to be able to describe this without losing our iTunes rating. It was crap. It was dumb. It was everything that you could have expected. If you would have just written down what a close game with the 49ers would end up looking like, this is exactly what it would have ended up looking like, minus everyone getting injured.
I think the number of injuries for sure was was the unexpected portion that really made the game a lot worse. But yeah, I think that a lot of Vikings fans entered this game knowing that this was completely on the table. Like, great win against the Packers. You kind of prove that you've got the ability to hang with some really good teams. You win a really important game against a hated rival. And so you know that there's going to be a rug pull, and it happens to be against, just whoever the next opponent is, happens to be against the 49ers, who are in the thick of it in the playoff race as well. And so they're competing against who they just lost to in a more realistic sense. Like, I don't know that it would have been better to like beat the 49ers and lose to the Packers because of the importance of the divisional tiebreaker. But the fact that it's on the table, that could have been a possibility, that it would have been better the other way around, is kind of annoying. So of course that's exactly what happened, that they split it. And it happened in a way that it was a very predictable way to lose, right? Because the Vikings got run all over. We knew that the Vikings were going to get stomped on in the run game. Like, I think it would have been kind of another example of us pointing to how Zimmer can pull some amazing defensive game plans out if they didn't get stomped in the run game. But that didn't happen. He didn't have the horses. I mean, he had 3 guys that I think were on practice squads this year playing significant rotations. You had like Deshaun Bauer and Eddie Yarbrough and Kenny Willekes. We're all playing. Well, actually, I don't think Kenny Willekes was playing, right? So they had to replace him. So they had DJ Wanham as the starter. They had Sheldon Richardson as another starting defensive end, and then they had James Lynch and Armon Watts as the 2 defensive tackles, and TJ Smith at defensive tackle. That's the other practice squatter. And so they just had this rotation of players that just wasn't, that either didn't have the development or just that didn't have the talent to really compete on an NFL level, especially like guys that typically don't even see snaps. I know that kind of in the week heading into the game, that Andre Patterson was saying, we don't view ourselves as depleted. We know that everybody who's on a roster, especially in a situation where you can just lose a player because of COVID just instantly, that you're always going to have somebody who's starting capable. But that fact that you need that doesn't change that you didn't have that. Like, you training players like Armon Watts to play, nose tackle or whatever, doesn't mean that he can play nose tackle. And so they got absolutely rolled through. And it's not as if we saw like a great game, I think, from the run from Eric Kendricks or anything like that either, but it just hurts when you don't have anybody who can kind of clear up those guards from getting to the second level. So that was a totally predictable way to kind of lose that game, to let Elijah Mitchell like run for 6 yards a carry or whatever it was before the final 2 drives. And by 2 drives, I mean the final drive was 2 kneel downs. So the final drive in reality was the one where you knew that they weren't going to throw the ball, and they didn't. So yeah, I mean, they gave up positive expected points against the run. That's just always a bad sign. I think they had a success rate running the ball of like 45%, which is an enormously bad sign. That was, I think, the primary defensive reason that they lost. There are a bunch of other reasons that are kind of worth pointing out when it comes to evaluating the game, right? Like, I think the refereeing was not good. I mean, okay, so here's the thing. There were definitely like bad calls on both sides, but the impact was the magnitude and the frequency of the bad calls hurt the Vikings, I think, significantly more. Adam Thielen was asked today about, hey, so that catch that they ruled not a catch, what's up with that? Did you get any clarification? And Thielen said, well, the officials told me that if it was ruled a catch on the field, it would have been ruled a catch on review, right? Because the default is to bias towards the ruling on the field. But they said that there just wasn't enough of video evidence. And boy, that one is tough for me to believe. that there wasn't enough video evidence to overturn. Like there's like a shadow of a moment where you don't see whether or not the ball hit the ground, and I just think that it's very clear that Thielen's hands are actually underneath it the whole time. So that sucks. There's, there were uncalled holding penalties against the 49ers. Zimmer pointed that out. 49ers fans didn't like hearing that. There were a couple eventually holding calls, and the problem is that's kind of where the bad calls came in, right? Because some of the calls against the 49ers that didn't really make a lot of sense included holding calls on the offensive line that were not nearly as egregious as some of the actual like significant penalties that they committed earlier that weren't called. So it's like a very inconsistent ref and crew. Obviously, pass interference is just an issue, generally speaking. So yeah, I mean, the officiating was bad. The defense against the run was bad. Against when Jimmy Garoppolo dropped back to pass, the defense was not awful, but there were just moments in the second half and obviously in the final 2 minutes where they just didn't look like they knew how to play football. And so you can't have that level of inconsistency and be a competitive team on defense. So, I mean, that's part of it. And then also, like, a part of the reason that they lost was that Cousins couldn't get it done, right? Like, they scored 26 points, and 7 of those were because of a kickoff return. I mean, that's not the level of offense that you expect given the amount of resources that you've sunk into it. So, Cousins, I think in the first half, his numbers were really good, but I didn't think he was like throwing very well. I think some of those passes were inaccurate and the receivers were just kind of reeling them in. I thought he missed open receivers. And then you get into the first couple of plays that he has in the second half. You've got that pick where his explanation for the pick was that he just didn't see the guy, which like, I mean, there's not like another way to break that. Correct. You just did not see that guy. I'm going to need you to see that guy in the future. Like, there's not like much deeper you can get there. Like, please pay attention to linebackers. They can pick off the ball too. That was pretty bad. The inaccuracy, I think, kind of magnified. Zimmer mentioned that, there's pressure in the pocket and like kind of in terms of like his ability to like throw into a stance, but he was actually the least pressured quarterback in the NFL this week. And so that really wasn't it. He definitely missed open guys downfield. And I think the biggest problem was in the final 2 drives of the fourth quarter. So in the final drive of the fourth quarter, he checks down to Alexander Mattison, and that I think was a bad play call. There wasn't really anybody open deep, and Mattison was like the most open, so I get it. But then he misses an open KJ Osborne, I think, the next play. I'm doing this one off of memory, so I don't know if I have the sequence exactly right. Then he checks down to Madison again, but there was definitely an open player downfield. Then he, I think, on the fourth down play, so there was a third down play to KJ Osborne that probably should have been called pass interference, but wasn't. And that's kind of what I mean by the pass interference stuff I mentioned earlier. But they had a fourth down, and that was a throw to Justin Jefferson, and that was missed really high. It was way too high for Jefferson. So that's a problem. But I think, people are going to remember the drive before that, right? Which is where he so there's 2 big brain farts in this game from Cousins. One is at the end of the second half where he throws it away on fourth down when it should be a Hail Mary. Like he just like throws it out of bounds, like an interception. That's the example of an interception not hurting you. Like, just throw it deep. Like, your dude might be down there. So just throw. What are you doing? Why is he throwing it away? He's just throwing that is like kneeling at the half, which is what we've been criticizing the Vikings for doing, right? So he just like gets rid of the ball and you miss a scoring opportunity there, right? And that could have been like a really great metaphor for who Kirk Cousins is as a player, right? Like in situational football, he just doesn't figure out what the situation is and makes this decision that would make a lot of sense in 95% of contexts, but absolutely doesn't make sense here. And that could have been kind of the emblematic moment, maybe not the defining moment, but the emblematic moment for kind of who Cousins is. But he like had another one in this game, and it occurred, I think, in the second to last drive against the 49ers. Already a drive that he's like doing a pretty poor job in. And then they get to, there was like a really great throw to Jefferson, I think was like kind of the one thing about that drive. Okay, so they get to the goal line and they they have to figure out whether or not they're going for it on fourth down. They do decide to go for it on fourth down. Cousins has to spend some time lining people up. He like travels 10 yards to tell Justin Jefferson to go somewhere. And then he lines up to take the snap. And the problem is that he lines up underneath the right guard to take the snap under Oli Udoh instead of Mason Cole.
Which is something that he has been ripped on by various media outlets and pundits and Twitter and all of that. When any Vikings fan knows that if the Vikings are like in that much of a hurry on a fourth down, they weren't going to get it anyway. So like, I wasn't even mad at the whole like, oh, he went under guard. Well, yep, fine, whatever. They used a timeout. They were able to take a breath and that gave them a better chance of getting it. They didn't get it, but like
because Cousins dirted it to Justin Jefferson.
He threw a McNabb style worm burner at point blank range to Justin Jefferson. I've defended Cousins for the most part this year and during most of his tenure in Minnesota. I could not defend that at all. It's almost like after that interception, he just like
fell apart. That's exactly what it felt like.
It was amazing to watch him just self-destruct like that. Like his programming just went, the ball needs to go into the dirt. He can bounce catch this. It'll be fine.
It's fine.
Jefferson, he was even looking at him like, what the hell are you doing?
What's going on here, man?
Like the right guard thing was not even the dumbest part of that whole situation. It was the McNabb worm burner.
Yeah. It's just, so like the thing about like this stuff is kind of what, and this piece I've already submitted to the editor. It's going to go live tomorrow. And I talked a lot about how you can't un-Cousins, right? This stuff about Cousins, a lot of it is like, it kind of doesn't, like you mentioned, it kind of doesn't matter, right? Like, okay, so they called a timeout. Fine. They weren't going to get it. That is exactly like when he kneeled, when he should have spiked the ball, kind of. So actually, it turns out he shouldn't. So I posted it, and some people were like correcting me, like, "Hey, that's not Cousins' fault," etc. And while I after kind of reframing it again, because I remember the conversation about it, and Jay Gruden coming out years later saying it's not Cousins' fault, although he did blame him at the time, which is like not great coaching if that's the case. Okay, so the long and the short of it is, if Cousins had spiked the ball there, he was coming off of a stopped clock, and so that would have been a penalty. Now, they did call that against Mahomes. I don't know if that they always call that, but people don't usually spike out of stopped clocks anyway, so it doesn't come up. But you can't spike out of a stopped clock. That is a intentional grounding penalty that is not listed in the intentional grounding part. The rules about intentional grounding, it's in like Appendix 189 or something stupid like that. So he can't spike the ball there. And I guess two receivers decided that they didn't want to run the route. They didn't want to run that play, and so they chose not to run the route. And so Cousins came out of that huddle knowing that those receivers just disagreed with the call. And so he just didn't know what to do, so he just kneeled. That doesn't really excuse him. He should have thrown it at the feet of those receivers, right? Like, and because there was 6 seconds left on the clock, and so he would have stopped the clock. Instead, by kneeling, he kneeled out, and then they didn't get any points, and they should have kicked a field goal off of that. But the coach should have just sent in the field goal unit. He just didn't want to, because if you kick a field goal, there's like 1 or 2 seconds left, so it would allow a return. And he wanted to waste 1 or 2 seconds off the clock, so that wouldn't happen with the play that he was going to run. So there's some context there. And then there's also other moments, right? Like the Kevin King interception against the Packers, was it like week 2, 2019? Bad decision, didn't know what he was looking at. No way to justify that pick, happens near the end of the game. But like Cousins had another drive after that. And then they didn't get it done on that drive. And Cousins was actually not that good on the drive, but there was a moment where they probably should have called pass interference. on the receiver covering Adam Thielen. But they didn't, and that's fine. And then the defense gives up like a 4-minute drive to the Packers following that. And so like that, I mean, that's Cousins' fault, right? To miss out on a game-winning opportunity near the end zone when he might have even been able to run it in to throw an interception, but it's not as bad as it seems. And then there's other moments where he's had game-ending interceptions or game-ending fumbles that are not really his fault, like the one that bounces off of Laquan Treadwell's hands. That was an interception. Or the one where Stephon Diggs decides to keep running the route instead of sitting against the zone. That was an interception. Or fumbles that aren't even on him, right? Like the Dalvin Cook or the Alexander Madison fumbles, or Alexander Madison not running the right read or hole against Seattle last year, right? Like there are all these end of game moments that are not his fault. But the reason that this like sticks in your head is because he's not good at the end of games. He's just not. And that like statistically bears out. Like we can remember like, oh wow, he had a great game against Green Bay last week. Fantastic fourth quarter comeback. He's had 2 fourth quarter comebacks and 3 game-winning drives this year. He had a great one against the New Orleans Saints in the playoffs. He had a 3-score comeback against the Denver Broncos. He's had a couple of game-winning drive and fourth quarter comeback opportunities that he has succeeded on, but he has largely failed. Right? He has largely not been good in the final 2 minutes, down 1 score. I go into that in a lot more detail in the piece. The reason that we don't really care about the time Brady held up 4 fingers to signify that he should have had another down because he thought it was now 4th down instead of him actually having spent 4th down. Like the reason that that's not a bigger part of the way we think about Brady is because he gets it done, right? And it is annoying as an analyst very often when we end up with like very outcome oriented understandings of players when we talk about process a lot. And then we just say, hey, Brady's a winner. And, Brady is actually one of the luckiest quarterbacks in NFL history too, right? Like he gets credit for a comeback to lead a kicker to a 54-yard field goal in the snow. And he benefits from the tuck rule. And, there's all kinds of moments where Brady is really lucky, right? But he also knows how to operate a 2-minute drill. Like there's no question about that. Right. And so, the fact that he gets to use that luck to bolster already a pretty good operation in the final 2 minutes. Like on top of that, he also happens to be lucky, and so now he looks like the most clutch guy of all time. And when he's in fact already very good, like that's why you don't remember the time he held up 4 fingers. I mean, you remember it, but you don't think about him when you do that. Like you think about Cousins like that guy that kneels when he should have spiked, even though, in all honesty, maybe he shouldn't have spiked and, maybe whatever, right? Or like that guy that lined up under right guard when, they were going to call a timeout either way. That you think of him that way because it represents kind of what you think of Cousins, which is that he's really good for like a good 90% of the game or 95% of situations in games. But then when situational football is a huge factor, kind of falls apart. We have a bunch of counterexamples. I listed a bunch of them, but we know that kind of like overall top down, he's not good at that. And that he has had moments where he's resisted and pushed back against that narrative, but not enough for you to kind of completely turn the page on it. And this is just kind of another example of that. And so that's like why that stuff sticks, is because he doesn't have a compelling counter case for it. Now, maybe, and that might not be fair, right? Like maybe if the Vikings just had a better game plan against the 49ers in that playoff, and Cousins had an opportunity to lead a 2-minute drive that didn't rely entirely on bootlegs into Nick Bosa, maybe we would think about Cousins differently if he organizes 2 game-winning drives in one playoff run to put the Vikings in an NFC championship game or something like that. Like maybe we think about him differently, and maybe, the San Francisco game, though he played very poorly in it, was not entirely his fault and doesn't really determine our understanding of his ability to perform in those situations. Maybe, that's all true. But like, honestly, he just doesn't have enough. The comeback against that Denver team, like that Denver team's not great. One of the other comebacks that he had this year was against the Lions team. They shouldn't have had to come back. That's not necessarily his fault. I mean, it's not like Cousins was the one who took the punt that was blocked or anything like that. But like the way you avoid having to come back against bad teams is by putting bad teams away, and he's not doing that this year. So there's like a lot. Like the reason the Vikings are like bad this year is not primarily his fault, but this game kind of explains why you can't rely on him to overcome that. Like when there's a bunch of reasons for a team to have lost a game in a one score game, and that's how one score games work, there's going to be a bunch of reasons. Like it is completely fair to say that if there had been better or fairer officiating in this game, the Vikings would have won. Like you can't know that from a counterfactual perspective, but I think it's fair that you can make a compelling case for it. I think you can make a compelling case that if the Vikings had their like defensive tackle vaccinated, they would have won this game, right? That is an argument that is compelling. That's not Cousins' fault, although I imagine if Cousins was vaccinated, it would have likely led to many more players on the team being vaccinated than not. But I think from an individual perspective, like Dalvin Tomlinson is responsible for who he is, then yeah, maybe, right? Like it's not Cousins' fault that Everson Griffin suffered another mental health crisis, right? And so he has to be safe, and so he can't be available for this game, right? And so there's like a lot of things that aren't his fault, but it's very much like because Kirk Cousins is your quarterback, you're left dealing with trying to figure out whose fault it is that you lost. It doesn't have to be Kirk Cousins' fault, but because he's your quarterback, you're determining why you lost instead of pointing out why you won. That's the problem, is that he can't overcome all of this. And the Vikings are not a great team, especially given the personnel that they had in this game, but they had enough opportunity to put it away from an offensive standpoint. Plus, they were gifted 7 points from special teams, plus 3 points from the 49ers missing a field goal, and they didn't do it. And so that's the issue, is that in the final 5 drives, the Vikings only had 5 drives in the second half. Another problem, primarily a defensive problem for the Vikings. But they had 5 drives and they scored 1 touchdown. Like, that's the issue.
Well, we might as well talk about the defense here real quick because of how badly they got destroyed. But this is a defense that was missing Everson Griffin, and we didn't get a chance to cover it or anything, but this was something that you could point to as a reason for the loss, is that Everson Griffin wasn't able to play due to his own situation. And it just didn't seem like any starters for that line are ever going to... It feels like this line is a lost cause.
Yeah, well, I think that the defense kind of is, right? Because the Vikings had an understanding of who their core defensive players were going to be, right? It was going to be Patrick Peterson, Dalvin Tomlinson, Michael Pierce, Danielle Hunter, Everson Griffin, Anthony Barr, Eric Kendricks, Harrison Smith, right? So that's 8 players, right? That's your core, right? And you understand that you were going to bring them back, right? The ones that were gone last year, so Michael Pierce, Anthony Barr for a couple of games, Eric Kendricks, Danielle Hunter, those 4 that were gone last year, right? And you bring in Patrick Peterson, that's going to be a big core. So let's say those 5 that are going to be like critical. And Patrick Peterson is a 1-year signing, so you can only really evaluate it. Like Dalvin Tomlinson might be a long-term signing, right? So those core players, those 5, have not played a single game together on the field. And that's wild. Right? Like that's like injuries happen every football team, and the Vikings probably have lost fewer games to injury than half the teams in the NFL. So it's not as if the Vikings are uniquely injured. Like the Ravens have like 20 guys on IR, right? And they're winning games, right? I think the 49ers might have more injuries lost. I think in terms of games lost to injury, I think they were less injured in this game, but they have more games lost to injury for the course of the season. But it is like telling that the Vikings have these 4 or 5 core players that have just not played a game together, right? And then you throw in signing Everson Griffin so you can get him, signing Dalvin Tomlinson so you can get him, and hoping that Eric Kendricks is going to be who he was 2 years ago, and for most of last year, and not getting to even see, Everson Griffin on the field for probably, hopefully not, but probably the rest of the season. I mean, it does feel like it's a lost cause. I mean, the Vikings had 4 understood starters at the beginning of the year. They had Everson Griffin, Dalvin Tomlinson, Michael Pierce, and Danielle Hunter, right? And their super sub was going to be Sheldon Richardson. Well, they didn't have any of those 4 guys, and their super sub is playing out of position at defensive end. Like that's how bad the defensive end situation is. They moved a defensive tackle to it. And James Lynch is playing nose tackle half the snaps, and Armon Watts is playing nose tackle the other half the snaps. And there's like a reasonable chance that Sheldon Richardson, the defensive end, weighs more than their nose tackle, James Lynch. Like that's crazy. And that's the situation that you're in. So the defensive line is kind of a lost cause. Obviously, you just don't have Daniel Hunter. You're not going to have Everson Griffin for a good chunk of the season. You're going to get Dalvin Tomlinson back soon, and hopefully you'll get Michael Pierce back soon. The Vikings haven't designated him off of IR yet, but and I don't know if they can for a little bit because they put him on IR pretty late. But yeah, you're not going to get the defensive line that you expected to have at the beginning of the season, and that's given the way that the Vikings had planned this offseason, a little bit heartbreaking. But it's also kind of what happens to a team that doesn't have depth.
And obviously, if it's as long as we're talking about what's kind of a lost cause, the corners aren't exactly in a position to be able to win right now either.
Yeah, and part of that is sometimes the nature of the defensive line not giving them time. That's not actually what happened in this game. Like the defensive line was atrocious against the run. They were pretty good at generating pressure, and that's because the 2 interior guys are not run stoppers; they're pressure producers. James Lynch led the FBS in pressures as a defensive, led at any position, but as a defensive end for Baylor. Like he's a pass rusher. He was pretty good against the run for an edge rusher, but he's a pass rusher playing nose tackle. Armon Watts was a 3 technique at Arkansas. He's a pass rusher playing nose tackle. DJ Smith is like 290 pounds. He's a pass rusher who jumped out of his boots at his pro day. Like he's a super athlete pass rusher that doesn't have a lot of heft and didn't play nose tackle. Like these guys are pass rushers that are playing these run stopping positions, but that did mean that they were able to get pressure on Jimmy, and they did a good job of getting pressure on Jimmy. So that wasn't the issue in this game, but yeah, not having the corners that you want. And this isn't a situation like the San Francisco's receivers are just good. I mean, we spent a lot of time talking about them in the last episode, obviously. This isn't a situation where better coverage corners would have done a lot for you because the way that San Francisco uses these guys is after catch guys more than, win routes guys. But that not having those guys was a huge problem when Jimmy decided to kind of throw down the field. Like, again, it's probably not the biggest issue. The biggest issue is probably that, you didn't get, Bashad Breeland had a bad game, but the biggest issue is not that you didn't get like Mackenzie Alexander to win every one of his snaps. It's that like Eric Kendricks was getting beat up by George Kittle, right? And it's that on critical drives, you didn't know who was covering the middle of the field, so that might be a confusion thing, right? From a coverage perspective, I don't know that anybody played well besides Harrison Smith, and Harrison Smith played well outside of just the pick too. Like he played pretty well in coverage. I'm surprised he didn't knock a couple of those balls out that he was able to get some contact on. But yeah, it was a bad coverage game, but I don't know that like better corners would have helped like so substantially unless it would have prevented some of this coverage confusion stuff that admittedly like would have been big. But like, Brandon Ayuk gets like 10 yards of yak against Mackenzie Alexander. Yeah, Alexander shouldn't have allowed, the 10-yard play to allow 20 total yards, but you got to tackle, right? Like Juwan Jennings over the middle of the field against Bashad Breeland gets 20 yards. That's a problem. But then Deebo Samuel just runs over him after like a 5-yard gain to get 7 yards of yak for a first down. Like that, you just got to tackle. And some of that's not coverage capability. Some of that's just tackling, and maybe a better corner tackles there. But a better coverage corner maybe doesn't stop some of the problems here. So yeah, the Vikings were bad in coverage, but it didn't really feel like, unless you have like a Darrelle Revis kind of shutdown guy, that you were going to be able to do much given what the Vikings were doing over the middle of the field.
Well, let's switch it over to offense, because if I start talking about Deebo Samuel, then it all goes to hell. So let's talk about offense for a moment. Kirk was not good this game. this was Justin Jefferson was still able to bail him out a little bit. Adam Thielen was able to bail him out a little bit. This was not a game where the run was working.
Yeah. What I find kind of surprising is so I saw Ezra Cleveland got like a really great grade, and so did Mason Cole for PFF, and so I wanted to check it out. And like the offensive line, like I said, the offensive line gave up a pressure rate of like 18%. It was the best of any team this week. So the offensive line pass protected well. Run blocking wise, I was kind of surprised to see that Ezra Cleveland got such a great grade. Not because I saw him play poorly or anything like that. I didn't notice him one way or the other, but because he had moments where he had struggled. And so I watched a couple of those offensive snaps back again. We were at the Kirk Cousins piece, but you also get to watch some of these other snaps where they're run plays. And yeah, that was nice that he was able to do that. But, Christian Darrisaw, I thought, had a really bad game as a run blocker. I think the PFF was maybe generous to him. I think that Mason Cole's grade is good, and you kind of understand why, but you also feel like he could do more. He's not going to lose his job, though, that's for sure. Oli Udoh was awful. He's the one basically that entered Dalvin Cook, right? And he was a big weakness. CJ Ham was not amazing as a run blocker, as much as I hate to say it. They didn't get a ton out of their tight ends run blocking. So like they lost like edge contain a lot. They lost some of their designed runs have a fullback lead, and they lost kind of those a lot. Oli Udoh got walked back a lot. Mason Cole never got walked back, but he didn't get to the second level very often, and I feel like he was maybe supposed to, so maybe that's worth a second look. Maybe I'll change my mind on that. Dalvin Cook had like one run where you felt like he had it in him, right? But for the most part, he didn't break one off. He didn't feel explosive. Obviously the fumble on that injury play, hurt them a lot. But like, yeah, the run game wasn't there. It was probably good of them to abandon it, but then Cousins not kind of following through and making good on that is really frustrating, because like the whole point, he's second in the NFL in cap hit this year. Second. There's one player with a higher cap hit. I forget who it is. It's not Matthew Stafford or Aaron Rodgers, but there's like one player. It's Patrick Mahomes, maybe? There's one player with a higher cap hit than him. Like, if you've got the second highest cap in the NFL and your starting running back gets hurt, it should not be a burden to ask you to throw the ball. Like, it's just wild. So yeah, he did not deliver throwing the ball. That was like when the Vikings decided to move away from the run, which I think was the right move given how poor their efforts were. And the offensive line was pass protecting well. You just see the throws were just erratic. They were just off. Even when they were completions, he'd cut off the opportunity for yards after the catch with his ball placement.
Well, let's look up that cap hit, because I was curious. The top three. Let's just do the top four. Russell Wilson at $32 million.
Well, he had a game tonight. Mostly bad. Pretty fun at the end.
Kirk Cousins at $31 million. Aaron Rodgers at $27 million and some change. And we'll go to Matt Ryan at 26.9.
Sure. Well, actually, the fifth guy was in the game too. Jimmy Garoppolo. He was playing against Cousins.
26.4. Yeah.
Yeah. God. And like the thing is, like, that year's cap hit is not necessarily always a fair way to think about a player, because when you sign them with the understanding that their impact on your cap is going to be in aggregate as opposed to individual. Like if Cousins had a really high cap hit this year for his contract, you respond to that by moving contracts around it before it and after this year, so that you can kind of balance it out. But that doesn't really work for Cousins because he has an escalating cap hit. And next year it's going to be like $45 million. Obviously, the Vikings are either going to draft a quarterback and just absorb the $45 million cap hit, or they're going to extend him and reduce that $45 million cap hit. But like next year's cap hit is nuts. And I don't think that next year is going to be the year he like turns it around, right? Now there are two other players with higher cap hits for 2022. One is Matt Ryan, and the other is Aaron Rodgers. But Yeah, I mean, it's not as if the cap hit that we're using for Kirk Cousins, we're just cherry picking an unusually heavy year that is designed to help the averages or anything like that. Like that is his impact on the roster. So yeah, um, I don't. The Vikings are probably not getting their money's worth out of this guy.
It's again, I've defended, and listeners to the show know I've defended the Cousins signing, even to a certain extent the money that he's been receiving because of good play, and that some of the difficulties he's run into haven't been his fault, but at some point the money he absorbs becomes his fault. It becomes it becomes a problem. So I mean, you look at the run, you look at the defense. It sucked. You know what? I don't even want to talk about Cousins. You know what I want to talk about? The hilarious 2-minute defense that this team attempts to put up every single game, and how it is ranked number 1 in something. Most points given up is it the modern era, or is it just the last 30 years in the 2-minute drill?
So the data I have actually only goes back to the year 2000. That's just the database I was using. I could do a little bit more work to see how much further back I can take it, but that's what I have now. So
next game, let's see if we can extend this back into the modern era. I realize what that could mean, but I want to know if this is like biblically bad, because it looks historically bad now, but it could be biblically bad.
Yeah, I mean the gap between 1 and 2 is okay. So here's what it is. In per game points given up in the final 2 minutes of the first half, which I understand is a very narrow statistic, right? Like it if it sounds like a mouthful, it's because there's a lot of qualifiers, right? But in the final 2 minutes of the first half, the Vikings are the worst team in the last 21 years. If you look at it by per game, which allows you to compare it to like the Bengals and stuff like that from 2018, the Vikings from 2020, the Jaguars from 2015, the Ravens, I think, from 2015. You take a look at all of those teams that were bad at it, and the Vikings are not in the realm of close to them, right? So in points allowed per game in the final 2 minutes of the first half, the Vikings have allowed 6 points per game in just those 2 minutes of the first half. Then below that, in second place is the 2018 Bengals at 4.75. Like that is an enormous gap. Like the gap between 1 and 2 is 1.25 points. Like that's incredible. The gap between 2 and 3 is 0.06. Like, and 4 and 5 are tied. Like they're very close. But the Vikings are just like way ahead of the rest of the group. So yeah, I mean, they're allowing, a touchdown a game just there. And so it's kind of funny because the Vikings are also like the best opening drive team in the NFL. This is like one of 2 games this year where they didn't score on the opening drive. And I believe one of 3 games where they didn't score a touchdown on the opening drive, I think is how that's worked out for them. And so in points per opening drive, the Vikings are nearly there at 6. And so they gain an advantage just to like give it up right away. And the Vikings remain the only team in the NFL this year to have generated a 7-point lead in every single game. And it is so frustrating. Like I don't like as frustrated as you were to talk about like the Cousins, because it's tough to talk about the Cousins contract, right? It's very difficult because you know he's a good player. You know that if he hits the open market, he's probably getting $30 million a year. You know that like losses like these are not his fault. And you also know that the reason that you can't sign depth, the reason that you can't, back up a $10 million Dalvin Tomlinson with a $5 million defensive tackle. Well, I guess you got Sheldon Richardson, but a $5 million nose tackle or something like that, right? The reason that you don't have depth is because you're committing $31, $32, $33 million to this guy, right? And so you know that he has to overcome those circumstances. So it's tough to talk about it because he is a good player earning good player money. So it's tough. That's frustrating. But like, this is like, because if the Vikings were one of the best 2-minute teams ever, right? If they never allowed a point in the final 2 minutes of games, but they also could not score in the opening 2 drives, right? So if the Vikings never obtain that 7-point lead, because I think in 7 of their games this year, the reason that they have the 7-point lead is exclusively because of that opening drive, something like that. So if the Vikings never get that, but they also don't allow the 2 minutes, that's not nearly as frustrating, right? Like there's no loss there, right? You don't feel like you've gained something just to lose it. You don't see the possibilities open up before you and then get taken away, right? Like, it's always crueler to give someone something and take it away than it is to never give them anything at all. That's just how brains work. We're dumb. So that's like, if the Vikings just don't score on those opening 2 drives, but they also don't allow points in the final 2 minutes of the first half, that's just a normal close game team, right? Like, that's just like, yeah, the Vikings are only in close games this year because they don't allow points in critical situations, but they also don't score points to help set them up. And so they're kind of always fighting it out until the end. Like, okay, great. That's a team that it doesn't feel like it's constantly punching you in the gut. That's a team that's just, it's tough to score sometimes, but it's tough to score on them. That's Steelers football, right? Like, that's just like that. You're used to that from like AFC North teams and teams that are designed to win on the ground and win with defense and kind of the reputation of the coach that the Vikings have anyway. But this sucks. It's dumb. And like, it's really annoying. Like, Luke Braun tweeted out after like a deep throw that was incomplete that it sucks watching deep passes in the NFL sometimes because you can't really react. You're holding your reaction back because you're waiting for the DPI flag. Yeah, and that makes the product worse. That's kind of what it is kind of like to watch the Vikings play this year, right? You can't enjoy a 7-point lead. We've seen that. The Vikings are 5-6. They've only had 7-point leads. Like, they get them all the time. And it does like, and you just, you can't enjoy it. You can't see how they'll close out that game. And it's not like a thing that like Zimmer is uniquely bad at. Like in previous years, when his teams have gained leads, they've done a pretty good job of maintaining them. Now, not always. I mean, we've seen Vikings collapse all the time, but they generally do a pretty good job of maintaining leads. But it's like this year, the Vikings maintain a lead, and like outside of the individual acrobatics involved in the play, like, wow, I can't believe Justin Jefferson contorted that way, or I can't believe Adam Thielen was able to run that route or whatever. Outside of the individual acrobatics of that play, you can't like enjoy a Vikings lead because by halftime it's gone. And so that's what sucks, is that as the one of the best opening drive teams in the NFL, maybe as historically good, right? And the worst closing first half team in the NFL, it's just a whole lot of tension, and that's what watching this team is. I guess it's just get Pepto-Bismol or something.
With apologies to Bomani Jones, the Vikings are not to be trusted. We have been saying this all year. I was screaming this at the Baltimore game at anyone in my section. I was probably going to get killed if the Vikings had actually won that game. But like, the Vikings this year are not to be trusted. You see the opening offense, you see the opening drive, or this game they didn't score, but you see the success they have initially, and they end up taking the lead. And you end up seeing the graphic about how they've won, or not how they've won. How they've led by 7 every game this year. Like, nope, the Vikings are not to be trusted. You see the graphic that comes up about Jimmy Garoppolo and if he throws a pick and how he hasn't won a game yet this year. The Vikings are not to be trusted. You see Harrison Smith grab that interception. Look great doing it. Great. The Vikings are not to be trusted. You know why? Because the Vikings give up that lead right away. Great. What happens during the rest of the game? Oh, Kirk Cousins throws his 3rd pick for the year. Surprise. Okay. But then he self-destructs and can't figure out his programming again to be able to actually like hit receivers with the numbers. The Vikings are not to be trusted. You watch the rest of the game go. All of a sudden, all the fumbles, like all the fumble luck we've had this year, or all the interception luck we've had this year, all of a sudden runs out. The Vikings are not to be trusted. And when it looked like there was a moment that the Vikings were going to be able to mount a comeback because it kept close for reasons only known to us true Vikings fans because we knew that the parasite does not kill the host immediately. It keeps it going. The Vikings are not to be trusted. You see the end of that game. It was close. It was closer than it should have been because of a missed kick. Nobody misses a kick against the Vikings, but the Vikings are not to be trusted. And you saw how the end of the game went. You saw that we got a little bit of, I say, ref luck. I maintained that the correct call was had on the field. But, of course, the next week it ends up going against the Vikings because the Vikings are not to be trusted. This team is exactly what its record says. This team is exactly what happens when you rely on luck and the refs in order to win games. And when you don't get either of those two things in your favor, you're stuck. It's like a couple of years ago when the Vikings were in a situation where the defense was scoring 14 points a game or something like that. It was absurd.
Yeah.
It was
2016.
Yeah, it was something.
The defense was outscoring the offense.
Yeah, it was something that people had never seen before. It was ridiculous. Well, not in Minnesota. It was like, this is absurd. You can't score that much on defense. It's not allowed. Fantasy people were screaming like, this isn't fair. You picked the Vikings up on the waiver and you're beating me because of them. Like, but when you took away the ability for the defense to do that, all of a sudden, the Vikings weren't winning. It's exactly what ends up happening here. If you're relying on the refs too often, if you're relying on luck too often, whether it be fumble luck or just dumb Minnesota sports luck, this is what happens. The Vikings are not to be trusted, especially not this year.
Yeah, and like when the Vikings lined up for that final drive, right? The feeling that I got was it wasn't like a confidence that they'll do this. It was the absence of fear that they wouldn't, if that makes sense, right? Like I had lost my disrespect for the Vikings 2-minute drill on offense, right? In part because of how they handled it in Green Bay, but also, you know, they nearly did it against the Ravens. It wasn't Cousins' fault in two of the comeback opportunities because of running back fumbles, and they did it against the Packers just the week before, right? So I had known that they had done it, right? And my thought was, this is kind of weird. I'm just waiting to see what happens without a thought about what will happen. It's been a long time. And then I thought, hey, you know, if Kirk Cousins does this, and I didn't think of this in an optimistic sense. I was thinking about this like in a writing sense. Like, how am I going to write about this game? If Kirk Cousins does this, maybe the story is something that we were trying to write last year but couldn't, essentially, or even 2 years ago, I should say. The story is that the Vikings have earned back your ability to watch the end of games. Not your trust that they'll win them, but earned back your ability to watch the end of games because Cousins is at least average at this sort of thing. And, you know, obviously a one-game sample changing your story, changing your take on what a quarterback is capable of or what a team can do it feels disingenuous. But you can kind of begin to build the case, and we're just beings of recency bias. And so you can talk about how it feels for the Vikings to have put themselves in situations where they can win comeback opportunities at a fairly consistent rate, as opposed to it being a surprise when it happens. Like the Cousins has like 9-10 game-winning drives in a Vikings uniform. Like it's not zero, right? But when it happens, you're generally surprised. And so if he had done it that time, I wouldn't have been surprised, right? But if he hadn't, I wouldn't have been, surprised either. It was a genuine, I have no idea what's going to happen, let's find out sort of situation, which is not usually the case. Usually I'm either surprised that they do it or unsurprised that they couldn't. And so if he had done it, I would have said the presumption shifts, I guess is the best way to put it. You now presume that they can do it, and you'll be disappointed when they don't, as opposed to you're going to assume that they can't do it, and now you're surprised if they do. And he could have kind of shifted where that needle is as you watch the end of games in this drive, and then he didn't do it, and it's just like, okay, yeah. I mean, we're constantly going to be in this state of like limbo. Like, uh, I mean, for one of the questions, I did research on like teams who win close games and stuff like that. And so there's probably some teams I can look at later when we answer that question in the mailbag where I can say, hey, this is like pretty good evidence that, there are some teams that have earned that kind of trust back. But there are players where they have earned that trust, where if they play close all game, you're going to give Rodgers a shot. You're going to give Tom Brady, like Tom Brady this week had a 2-minute opportunity and he failed on it. But that, like, everyone was like, yeah, but most of the time he'll get it, right? Which I think percentage wise, that's not true. Like, I think there's only one quarterback above 500 in comeback scenarios, and I think it's Peyton Manning. I don't have all the numbers on it. It might actually be Tom Brady, and Peyton Manning might be 2, and he might be at like a 48% win rate or something like that. But there's only one. But like, these teams or these quarterbacks that have built this ability and reputation for coming back, even though they don't do it most of the time, like Lamar Jackson, like, Aaron Rodgers, like Patrick Mahomes, even though he's playing very weirdly right now. You want to watch the end of games. For Vikings fans, you have to endure the end of games.
I'm tired. I'm very tired of this. And the bingo card on Patreon will reflect the general dislike of how these things have gone. I may just have the opponent's scores in the final 2 minutes of the first half as the free space. Like, it's ridiculous. I didn't even look at the TV during the 2-minute drill. Like, I just looked at my phone. I didn't need to. I knew it was going to happen. You knew it was going to happen. The other team knew it was going to happen. They could have, if a fourth down came up, why should they stop? This is what the Vikings do this year. The Vikings are not to be trusted. They're going to do something stupid or pass to CJ Ham, who I love, but it doesn't make any sense why he's 20 yards down the field. Like, it's just annoying. And of course, this is the injury bug game too. This is the game where everybody seems to get hurt. Anthony Barr wasn't, looks like he re-aggravated his knee, ? Darisaw got hurt. Looks like he might practice later this week. Dalvin Cook obviously gets hurt. Like, this was the ambulance game. And it sucks. I'm just tired of having to watch to the end of these games and knowing exactly how it's going to end up turning out. Sorry if this turned into I get like one rant every 2 years that's like on this scale. But it sucks. It's just, we sit and cover this and I enjoy doing the show, but I do not enjoy watching this team in a close game. It sucks for me. It sucks for you guys. The other people like watching it. You can only commiserate so hard and like make it through this. I just want a team that's good, or failing that, like laughably terrible. And I get neither. Yeah. I get a team that on its best days looks like it could clean up with anybody in the NFC. And on its, I don't even know what you call it, this last Sunday, it does that. And it
is like shocking that the performance that they had ended up as a one-score game. And of course it involved a missed kick from a Hall of Fame level kicker. But
and a missed kick from us too. Like, let's not forget that Greg Joseph missed an extra point and it swung a couple of games in the Hell League and the North Code Leagues. Like,
yeah. So like after a performance like that, it is like surprising that was a one-score game. An 8-point one-score game, not quite what most people think of as a one-score game, but a one-score game nevertheless. I mean, just watching it didn't, like, if the Vikings had tied that up, right? So if they had tied that up and then won it in overtime, because the Vikings are not bad in overtime, and that I think kind of proves, or maybe doesn't prove, it provides additional evidence that the issue with Cousins is not bright lights or anything like that. It's that he plays poor situational football. He's really good in overtime. Now, it's a very small sample size, but his statistics in overtime, which in this case do map on to real world events, like winning against New Orleans, and he was like 1-2 this year in overtime. he's good in overtime, and that's you don't have to run the clock. You don't. There's no 2-minute drill, right? You just get the ball and you just you just run your normal offense, and so if the Vikings tie it up, go into overtime, and win the game, right? Like if that had happened, I just feel like the response to that, it's always positive, right? Like the Vikings get beat up and then they win a game. I think a lot of people feel positive after that. Like the whole point is to win. And then they start viewing a lot of these performances through rose-colored glasses. Like, we always win when Cousins isn't under pressure and he only had an 18% pressure rate. That's incredible. But I just feel like if that had happened, you'd still walk away thinking, man, this team has all kinds of problems. They are so lucky Jimmy Garoppolo was bad. This team has all kinds of problems. Like if they had won, it would have felt like a win, kind of, but it wouldn't have felt like any evidence of the Vikings' quality. Like it was just a bad game. They played poorly.
It would have felt like the victory over the Lions.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think I tweeted right after the Lions scored that the Vikings absolutely deserve this, and then when they won, people found that tweet and said, no, they don't. The Vikings don't deserve this win. And like I was saying, they actually deserved the loss. I didn't think they would come back to win it. But yeah, exactly. After the Lions win, a bunch of people were like, yeah, well, it chalked it up as a W. I'm happy my team has a W, but man, do they suck. Wow. They almost lost to Jared Goff, who has still not won a game without Sean McVay.
That's all right, because the other quarterback in that trade is struggling now too. And as it turns,
3 consecutive games with pick sixes.
Yeah, the fun part about the Matthew Stafford thing now is that the rest of the NFL has now discovered that he can't win against winning teams. So it's not just an NFC North thing. Like the rest of the NFL is noticing, oh hey, he was sheltered in the NFC North.
Yeah, he got to play the Bears.
Yeah, he beat up on some terrible. Well, I say beat up on. The Lions didn't really beat up on a lot of teams, but the wins he got,
he got to show his chops against. Yeah,
that. Before we get into the mailbag, and we do have some good stuff in the mailbag for the record. What's the update on Darrisaw? Is he practicing later this week?
Yeah, it doesn't look like we have much of an update on Darrisaw. Zimmer didn't tell us anything. I mean, his leg got, I think, rolled up on. I don't know how long-term this is going to be. I don't have an opinion based off of the video, but I will say he did pretty well against Nick Bosa. So that's cool. That's all I got. The injury is we just don't have enough information yet. We'll find out on Wednesday.
Well, let's go over to the mailbag. Since we went a little long on this one, let's go to the mailbag here. Zen Cupid asks, with the last 2 Super Bowls resulting in the defending champions losing, it feels like the Super Bowl hangover is very alive. What can the 49ers learn from the Vikings and Packers to prevent losing next week's Super Bowl to the number 1 contender Seahawks? I said last week that we should just make this a linear championship, like a wrestling title or something. And there's versions of this that have existed for a while, but I think now this one needs to be in session. The Norse Code linear Super Bowl title is currently being held by the dastardly 49ers, and they are playing against the Seahawks. I suppose the thing you need to do is try to maybe sow some more discontent between DK Metcalf and Russell Wilson.
What did DK Metcalf have 1 target this game, right? So yeesh.
There's an interesting conspiracy theory out there. If you really want to head out on Twitter and find out about some not an issue between DK Metcalf and Russell Wilson, but I'm not going to mention it because again our iTunes rating, but it's a funny conspiracy theory if nothing else. This whole thing's a mess, and I think that the 49ers are probably going to keep this one, simply because the Seahawks don't know how to play football at the moment.
Yeah, I think
the Bengals might be Wilson an interesting fight. It might be an interesting fight on the 12th of this month.
Yeah, the biggest concern is the Titans game, I think, right? For 2 reasons. Obviously, the Bengals are a good team that could take it away from the 49ers. The 49ers are not that great of a team, so entirely possible. And I will admit, Wilson has been looking better game by game since returning from injury, but obviously he doesn't look good yet. So But the concern I think is the Titans, because I don't think the Vikings will really ever get. I guess they don't get an opportunity to play the Bengals, but I just don't think they get an opportunity to play the Titans. So it would be tough to take that Super Bowl back. There's 3 AFC opponents on the 49ers schedule that they just will not play in any reasonable span of time, and by the time they play them, those teams will have lost to somebody. So it's the Bengals, Titans, and Texans. Now it's hold on. There might be an opportunity here. Let me see something. So the Bengals play the 49ers, and then they play the Broncos, Ravens, Chiefs, and Browns. So nothing there. The Falcons. So who's left on the Viking schedule? It's the Steelers. It's the rest of the NFC North. And are those 4? No, and the Rams, right? So it's those 5.
Yes.
So they don't play. Okay, so they play the Lions a second time next week. So they'll play the Lions and then the Steelers. Okay, I'm trying to map out a convoluted path for this to work in the regular season. It may not be possible. The Vikings will have to hope that the team that beats the 49ers, whether it be the Seahawks or the Rams, make the playoffs, right? So the Rams, almost certainly will. They could, if they continue the pace, they could drop out of the playoffs entirely. I've played with the playoff machine to know that they could just lose their playoff spot. Also, by the way, there is a path I found where the Vikings win every single one of their games for the rest of the season and miss the playoffs. I believe it requires that the Rams go 12-5 and the Packers go 12-5, and then the rest of the qualifying teams go 11-6 along with the Vikings, and then the Vikings will have lost those tiebreakers, because the only tiebreakers they'll hold will be over the Rams, who just have a better record, so it doesn't matter, and the Packers, who will just have a better record, so it doesn't matter. And so they lose a tiebreaker to Dallas because of the head-to-head. They lose a tiebreaker to Washington, I think, because of conference record, and so on and so forth. So it is possible for the Vikings to win out and not make the playoffs. It is a very thread-the-needle, minuscule likelihood at this point. I think it's less than 0.1%. So it's definitely happening. But it is possible. But yeah, so if the Vikings make the playoffs and the 49ers essentially win out, except against the Rams, so if they lose to the Rams, and by then the Vikings will have played the Rams, so they can't take it back, right? That's the last game of the season, January 9th. So if the 49ers lose to the Rams have it, then the Vikings have to win enough to make it to the Rams, which is probably, it might be the championship game, but it could be a division game. Then they can take the Super Bowl back. So it is possible that the Vikings get the Norse Code Linear Super Bowl trophy back. But it's tough because the 49ers neither play anyone who's going to play the Vikings, nor, I believe, play anyone who will play the Vikings. I guess I could check the Seahawks schedule real quick. Maybe it's possible. So if the 49ers lose to the Seahawks, then the Seahawks play the Rams on December 19th, and then the Vikings play the Rams on December 26th. Oh, okay, that's how it happens. Perfect. So we can still do it in the regular season. So we need the Seahawks to beat the 49ers, and then, by we, I mean we, the Norse Code Linear Super Bowl commissioners, need the Seahawks to beat the 49ers.
A win for all of us.
Yeah, win for all of us. And then the Seahawks beat the Texans, and then the Seahawks lose to the Rams, and then the Vikings beat the Rams December 26th. And of course, they'll beat the Rams because the Rams are a good team, and who knows who the Vikings are. So they beat the Rams to defy our expectations, probably a week after losing to the Steelers. That would be so funny. So, yeah, it is possible for the Vikings to regain their Super Bowl trophy, which is great because
nobody's ever won it twice in a year.
That's true. Exactly. The fact that the Vikings have only ever won one Super Bowl and they've only had it for 1 week seems pretty appropriate. That we've invented out of whole cloth a Super Bowl for them, and they couldn't even hold on to it.
Yep, that's just where we're at. Ollie Haney asks, should Kene Wangu start writing his Hall of Fame speech now or wait until he has some free time in the offseason?
Oh, I think that he has to learn how to play running back first. So uh, probably wait until next week. So, I mean, obviously, he's going into the Hall of Fame as a returner. That's not my point. My point is that he's going to have to play a lot of running back next week, and it doesn't seem like he fully understands all his assignments yet. So, probably devote his time to that, and then when Dalvin Cook is healthy, he can just forget all of that nonsense. He's not going to play running back again. He gets to play kick returner and be the next Cordell Patterson or even better, which is tough because Cordell Patterson is the best kick returner to ever play, which also means the best kick returner to have ever played for the Chicago Bears. Yeah, so Wangu, who I believe has 2 touchdowns on 9 returns or something nuts like that. He's on a Hall of Fame pace. I guess I will say that as a returner, and I mean it's probably just going to create a lot of touchbacks for the Vikings, and that's annoying because there's a ton of touchbacks this year, so it's not that valuable. But it is very funny.
I actually just looked up to see what is going on with Amir Abdullah, just to see if he'd be possible for.
Oh, he's on a team, right? He's on the Panthers, I think.
He's on the Panthers. Yeah, I was going to see if it would be possible to snag him if he wasn't signed, but he is.
No, McCaffrey just went on IR.
Yeah.
They're not letting go of Abdullah.
Yeah, McCaffrey just went out, so he is going to stay there. Tommy Gunn asks, I feel like this was a very Viking game, that the Vikings Vikinged up beautiful.
Yes.
But there's always room for improvement in Vikingdom losses. How could the Vikings have made this game even more Vikings-esque? Case Cookus?
Case Cookus. So 2 opportunities come up in my head immediately in response to this question. One is completely non-original, which is a extra point kick block return for 2 points. I mean, we just saw it happen, so it's in my head. But I think the other one is an Iron Bowl style kick 6. I think would be like a good one, right? Like the Vikings, Greg Joseph's not that accurate, but man, he's got a leg. We'll set him up to kick a 60-yarder and just and not even, it doesn't even get to the bottom of the field goal post at the end. It doesn't even get to the end zone line, and the returner returns it Cromartie style.
What would be great too? Well, the reason why this also works is because of the Vikings' history with having problems fielding on special teams when it comes to this sort of situation. So the only way it could be better is if we were playing the Bears at that particular moment, but you can't always get everything in a perfect situation. So
there's always room to make things more Vikings. So perfection is impossible, but it is a worthy goal to work towards.
Always. Nolan Kaler asks, Nolan, quit sending in messages about Jeremy Camp. I don't know anything about Jeremy Camp. I'm not answering anything about Jeremy Camp. Also, we're not going to get the guy from Kirk's, the guy photoshopping Kirk Cousins to have a Disney mom butt. We're not going to get him on the show. So stop asking about that. But Nolan Kaler does ask, who is Checks Notes TJ Smith?
Yeah. So I mentioned he's a pretty excellently testing athlete. 293 pounds from Arkansas, played alongside Armon Watts. He also played alongside McTelvin Agim, who's the nose tackle there. Had decent production last year in a shortened season. I think 7.5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks, something like that. But he's more an athlete than he is anything else, and he's only a very good athlete, not like an extremely nuts athlete like a Milton Williams or an Aaron Donald or something like that. I tend to be biased for good testing athletes at defensive tackle and defensive end. So it'd be kind of cool if he stayed on the practice squad and he continued his ability to kind of develop. But yeah, I mean, he's not great right now. It says a lot that he was on a practice squad all of last year, and then the Vikings signed him off of, I think, the Chargers practice squad this year. It's not as if the Chargers are full to the brim with defensive tackle talent. And so him not being able to crack the bottom end of that roster, that's probably meaningful.
Let's go to Jack Rackham's Arif's meddling family members corner. When are we going to hear from Jefferson's and Thielen's dads?
I think the next time we hear from Thielen's dad, he'll be raising money for Adam Thielen's Detroit Lakes state Senate campaign, whatever district Detroit Lakes is in. So it's going to be a bit till we hear from him. Jefferson's dad, or family or parents. Actually, it'd be great because what he calls Odell Beckham like a brother, right? So he has Jordan Jefferson, his bigger brother, and Odell Beckham, his like surrogate brother. It would actually be super funny if older brother Odell Beckham edited a video of him always being open and not getting targeted. That would rule.
Because he has time to do that, or has the money to have a production company do that. Yeah. Damian Barrett asks, has any team ever worked harder to get to a 500? And which game will we eventually tie to give this season both symmetry and knock us out of the playoffs?
I think the tie versus, well, it can't be Detroit because Detroit has to go 0-16 in a 17-game season. I think they tie against
there's a bad
Bears
tattoo involved, and I have to support that.
It's important. It's important. There's a lot on the line. I think it might have to be a bad Bears team that still hasn't figured it out. Like either Justin Fields still hasn't really, like he's only has the one good game and still hasn't figured out kind of what works and what doesn't, or Andy Dalton is still playing or something like that. I think that's the team they tie against because like what they would have to beat the Lions for the Lions to go 0-16-1. And then they could lose to the Rams, beat the Packers again to make it like interesting, tie the Bears, and I think then if they win against the Steelers, that's 8-1. I was doing very quick math in my head, but I might have screwed that up. Either way, well within the cards. I think tying against the Bears is the most embarrassing, even though the Steelers are bad.
I think that they tie against the Packers just because it would drive them nuts to not be able to beat the Vikings this year.
That's right. Yeah. Oh my God. And that would be the second time the Packers have tied the Vikings. That's great.
Yep. That's what I'm looking at. Dr. Aaron Matson asks, what's the NFL record for losses by one score? How far will the Vikings blow past it this year?
So it is still possible for the Vikings to hit the losses mark by one score. Now it's unfair because there's another game this season, so we're not competing on an even playing field. But the most losses in a season is like a 7-way tie. Let me see, 11-way tie for the most losses by one score in a single season, and that is 9 losses. So, and also the Detroit Lions have 8 losses and a tie because obviously ties are within one score. I just want to throw that out there that is also on the table, but there have been 2 teams that have had 14 one-score games since like 1940, right? 14 one-score games in the NFL. One of those teams, the 2015 Ravens, lost 9 of them, and so they have the worst win-loss percentage. But there are 10 other teams that have lost 9 games. 4 of them played 13 such close games. I should say the Ravens have the best win-loss percentage of the 9 lost teams at 357. And then 1, 2, 3 of them have had 12 such games with 9 losses, and 4 of them have had 11 such games with 9 losses. And so those 4 actually have the worst winning percentage in one-loss games. My bad, I read it the wrong way. 2 of those teams are the Detroit Lions. 2001 Detroit, 2006 Detroit. The Houston Texans, 2013, were 2-9 in one-score games. And so that's the other team. Of the 9 losses from one-score teams, 4 of them are the San Diego Chargers, or I guess just the Chargers franchise in general. 89, 91, 2015, 2016. That is the most Chargers stat I've ever heard. And of course, the fact that the Vikings have the ability to beat this and have 10 one-score losses is an exciting and tantalizing thing for them to be able to do and to treat the rest of the NFL to. Also, by the way, wins, close wins. Houston Oilers 1978, Seattle Seahawks 2019, both have 10 wins in one-loss games. The New York Giants 1994, that was the other 14 one-point games. They were 9-5, and so they rank second in wins. So there's a bunch of teams here that have won, and like that Seahawks team went on to win like 12 games in 2020, right? So like they didn't have to bounce back from this crazy amount of luck that they got. I guess they're paying for it now, but also Russell Wilson got hurt.
Next question is from Bishop Sycamore Alumnus, who asks, for a Reef's recency bias corner, is this the most Kirk game we've seen, or am I forgetting one? I guess the Spike/Neil may live in infamy.
Yeah, well, they won the Spike Neal game, I think. And that occurred at the end of a half. That didn't occur at the end of a game. So they won that game. So I think it has to be a game where they lose or tie, because tying is a very Kirk Cousins, like, a 500 quarterback, right? But yeah, I think this is up there, but it's like there's good Kirk games that are quintessentially Kirk, and then there's bad Kirk games that are quintessentially Kirk, and this is the bad game. But I just feel like there's again, like there's a way for the Vikings to have Vikings harder in this game. There's a way for Kirk to have Kirked harder, and not even because like he did anything differently. Like if there was much more pressure in this game, then Kirk Cousins failing under pocket pressure and airing out these throws, throwing interceptions at bad moments, not having situational awareness, throwing away during a Hail Mary situation at the end of a half, lining up under the wrong guy, like that would have made it really Kirk. So it is possible, I think, that there's a game that represents that in a way that is more Kirk Cousins than this one. But yeah, recency bias corner would default to saying this was the most Kirk game.
All right, a Reef's neglected resistance band asks, let's see if this works. Case Cookus. Professor Poop asks, losing our entire defensive line has proven to be quite the fecal catastrophe. What can the Vikings do to alleviate some of the issues for this season, or are we simply doomed?
I mean, I think getting Dalvin Tomlinson back from the COVID-19 list, getting Michael Pierce back from IR, whenever that's possible, that'll help. I don't know that they'll have an edge rusher answer, so I think that they're always going to have some issues. But I think that the Vikings might have learned something about their ability to generate pressure from the interior. Like they did a good job generating pressure. Like that was part of what happened. So they might kind of mix that in a little bit more. So you might see mixes of Armon Watson, James Lynch, along with Michael Pierce, Dalvin Tomlinson. And it feels like the Vikings are taking a very long, circuitous route to learn what they did originally was fine, having a pass rushing tackle and a nose tackle. Like having Tom Johnson and Linval Joseph next to each other ruled. That was good. That's why not do that again? Why not put a really good pass rusher against right next to a really big nose tackle and let them play like normal football, like that's been played since like the Jimmy Johnson 4-3 era in Miami. Like that seems like something that doesn't require a ton of innovation. And I feel like they might have put themselves on a path to rediscover that possibility, which would be very funny because they just sank tons of money into both of those nose tackles.
Le Cavassier asks, can we start referring to the Viking secondary collectively as the 4-6 Mafia?
That's so good. That's so funny. My God.
That's terrible. And also hilarious. Kenneth Allen asks, how did the defensive line play given the circumstance? Clearly, they were outmatched, but taking the situation into account, out of position or career backup starting, were there any good notes or information we can use to project future performance?
Yeah, well, so there's the pressure bit. That's important. But beyond that, God, I think that some of I almost tweeted this out, but I held back because I knew if I did tweet it out, the Vikings would get gashed in the run game. And then they did. So I'm really glad I didn't put that tweet out there. But I think one thing was that the Vikings did not try to play football as if they had those nose tackles in there, which was the right move. It didn't work, but I don't think playing as if you had Dalvin Tomlinson or Mike Pierce there would have made things better. And one on their most effective run defense plays, they did a pretty good job of creating chaos. And by that, I mean they just did not really care about it didn't seem like, maybe this was an accident, maybe they tried to clean it up, but it did not seem like they cared too much about landmarks. Like they didn't. So here's an example. So if you're a defensive lineman and you're lined up between the center and the guard, right? So you're lined up between the center and the offense's left guard. And the play is a zone run to the right. So they're running away from you to your left, to the offense's right. And your job is to, stop the run or prevent cutback lanes or whatever. So primarily, it depends on, the front and the assignment or whatever, but primarily your job will to be on the outside or play side shoulder of that guard. So you will be running right towards the running back, hoping that guard does not cross your face and pivot and block you out. So you will always want to be on that guard's right, and then shed that block to make a play if you have an opportunity. That's normal, and you're attempting to hold your gap on a zone running play and get to the sideline and stuff like that. There's some really good defensive tackles that do not do that. And the linebackers either have to adjust or just live with it, right? And like Aaron Donald, for example, does this, right? And like Troy Reader for the Rams just has to like be like, oh, I got a new gap now. I'm over here. And they will just find an opportunity to get into the backfield and try to mess things up there instead. And sometimes that can mean backdooring, like letting the guard cross your face, and then instead of letting them pivot and block you out, like swimming over them and getting in behind them into the backfield. And there's like a bunch of other ways you could do it. You can try and you can try and see, hey, I know that this is going to be a zone run, and maybe because the center has to delay just half a bit to get their hands in because they just snapped the ball, you could try and beat the center up into that gap, and that's a bunch of freelancing. You can screw things up a lot, but if you could do it, you can do it, right? And I feel like the Vikings were trying to do something like that. I think they were trying to say, and again, I'm just guessing, but I think they were trying to say to their defensive tackles, look, just get back there and screw things up. Like, just be chaotic, and that's gonna. They're a physical team, but they also kind of rely on a level of precision and timing for the way that the run game works. So just mess that up. And on some of their best run defense plays, it looked like that's what they did. So that might be another positive takeaway about the way they might approach run defense in situations like this in the future. So that's something that I kind of want to explore a little bit too, if that's what they did. There's a lot kind of that I want to take a look back at that I haven't yet. Like, I still haven't looked back at whether or not Eric Hendricks has deserved some of those bad PFF grades that he's gotten. I just haven't had the time to look at that. I've got a different assignment for what I'm going to write this week, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to that. But that's an interesting theory that I'm putting out there. I would love for somebody to investigate that if I can't.
I mean, plus you've been eating bougie cookies for a good portion of this evening, so like
I've had 2.5 cookies. One of those cookies was enormous, but I deserved it because they forgot to deliver it to me.
It was bougie cookie night at the Hassan household.
They're not bougie. They just, okay, I acted bougie, but the cookies are not.
You had cookies delivered. That's all I'm saying about why we got delayed tonight. Had nothing to do with...
And they forgot half my order, and I let them know, very politely, by the way. I was just like, hey, by the way, half of my order isn't here. They're probably as altered as most of their user base, right? Like, who's ordering cookies at 10 p.m., right? So, like, I get it, right? And they're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm like, dude, it's fine. Just deliver the other half. And they're like, we'll throw in some free cookies. And I'm like, dude, cool. I didn't even ask. That's great. Awesome. Thank you. And they did. And I'm just going to, we don't have a thing against mentioning products. We just don't have sponsors. It was Insomnia Cookies. Longtime listeners of the show know that I've interacted with Insomnia Cookies a lot. Much more in the past than now, especially because when I lived in Uptown, they didn't deliver there. But, yeah, they're just like, oh, yeah, sorry, we didn't get your s'mores cookies. I think I was like, I was training someone who was like, I didn't care about the explanation because I was going to forgive this guy anyway. I don't like, it's fine. They're cookies. It cost me like $7. Like, if you're going to deliver them to me, I'm fine. But the guy's like, I was like training someone and I told her to do this and she didn't. And I'm like, sorry. I'm like, dude, it's cool. But then he's like, so I can just throw in some extra s'mores cookies, which, by the way, are their premium cookies. They've got 2 tiers of cookies, and there's the normal. You put them in the 6 boxes, and you get them for $11 for 6. They're all overpriced, but that's how the business model works. I was fine with it. But then the s'mores cookies, which people know I love marshmallow and stuff. I'm just a sucker for it. And those are $3.50 a cookie. I shouldn't have even ordered one. It's obscene, right? And they forgot it. And so like, we'll just throw in some other s'mores cookies. And so I told James, like, hey, I'm going to be late to record because I got to wait on the second batch of cookies coming towards me. By the way, thanks for, if anyone here is affiliated with Insomnia Cookies, thanks for being cool about it, man. Thanks for the extra. I didn't even need the extra cookies. All it did was make James mad, which is good. So
I just think that somebody who's a self-described man of the people to be enjoying bougie cookies like that instead of recording is just.
When have I ever said I'm a man of the people?
Let's go to the NUFC podcast. Stands for Newcastle United, who asks, let's just cut to the chase. Are we going to have to watch a Zimmer Cousins team in 2022? Asking for my future miserable self. I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, I'm sorry, man. Make plans. Maybe join a book club that meets on Sundays so you don't have to deal with it. I don't know, but like, prepare, I think, in 2022 for that, because the Vikings get close enough to make the playoffs, and I think that their purpose in life is to hurt Vikings fans, so they will make the playoffs. If they do that, I think there's no way you get rid of Zimmer. And I think if you don't get rid of Zimmer and you've got this weird Cousins contract scenario, you probably have. The only thing is you might have another quarterback. It could be Kellen Mond, and maybe we shouldn't be so quick to give up on him or anything like that. But you might have another quarterback learning under being groomed under Cousins to take over long term. But that's it. I think you've got Cousins starting like 16, 17 games next year.
Alex asks, will I be more sad come the offseason if the Vikings make the playoffs, only to be obliterated by the Packers, or just miss the playoffs entirely?
I mean, I do think they make the playoffs, right? Because that's the way they hurt you. So, and maybe they play against the Packers. I just think it would be more Vikings if they win the wild card round and then play the Packers in the divisional round and then get their doors blown up. Like they would sweep the Packers in the regular season, giving Vikings fans in unnecessary overconfidence, right? Unearned superiority over Packers fans, only for them to actually play the Packers in the playoffs and just get crushed 42-3. Like, just 42-2 actually is more embarrassing. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Next question is from Logan, who asks, as creators, do you feel there's even a need for the NFL to pay players, coaches, etc., when you're available to create great content at a fraction of the cost?
So this is a reference to a tweet from John Yushai, who tweeted, Mr. Beast Squid Games video, 103 million views in 4 days, took 7 weeks to make. Netflix's Squid Game series, 111 million views in 30 days, took 10 years to make. More views, less time, fewer gatekeepers. That's the promise of the creator economy. And like, every level of that is wrong. And in the exact same way that that we would argue that we don't need the Vikings because we, a Vikings podcast, create better content than the Vikings, right? Like, whether or not that's true, and it is impossible to create better content than the Vikings, by the way, but let's assume that it's true. Like, it's obviously the case that without being able to, like, talk about the Vikings content, we wouldn't have Vikings content, which is exactly how the Squid Game scenario works. which, by the way, I guess James hasn't watched Squid Game, which it seems like it's doing the quick burnout thing that a lot of pop culture stuff does nowadays. But I would still very strongly recommend it. The Mr. Beast Squid Games video, I think all the criticisms about it are like pretty spot on. And if you're like really interested in seeing people try to cancel one of the most popular YouTubers on the planet, I'd recommend watching those videos because they're mostly right. I mean, they're not going to be successful in canceling Mr. Beast, but like, I think the criticisms are good. But also, like the video, I had to watch it. In the Mr. Beast video, like obviously it misses the whole point of the show, but it's like not bad popcorn entertainment. I don't like Mr. Beast. I just don't. Not a content creator I enjoy. I don't really like hate him. I mean, there's some stuff about like his history I hate, but like his content is whatever. But like the Squid Game video itself is like pretty well done, and it's like pulling teeth out for me to admit that.
Let's go to Kyle Slaby, who asks, will the Vikings lose a game this year by more than one score?
No.
For a Reef's Christmas war room, what decorations should I use in and around my work office to stealthily sneak in secular holiday values under my coworkers' noses? I want to convert them into holiday freedom fighters without arousing suspicion.
You know, when the FBI does that, that's entrapment, right? like when the CIA recruits, well, I don't want to get this podcast canceled. But just put that out there so that you're safe in your war on Christmas. And by war on Christmas, I don't mean a war that occurs on Christmas. I mean war against Christmas. I think that the decorations you want to use are decorations that could very easily be interpretable to somebody who's looking for it to be like a Christmas decoration. So, for example, you should take a look at Witch Talk and see what herbs they use in their spells. And then act as if those herbs are holly and you're hanging them up around your office cubicle. Maybe throw in some red berries to make it seem like it is mistletoe or whatever, right? That, I think, would be one sneaky way. And then your office smells like sage, and that's not a bad thing, right? That's fun. So I think that like finding decorations that are like pretty close would help. Also, one of my favorite decorations, so, you know, we go to Vermont every year to celebrate Christmas with my brother, and one of the Christmas traditions that my brother and Chelsea and I have is that on Christmas we always eat at a Chinese restaurant. It's like very a Christmas story, right? And so one of our ornaments on the tree is one of those Chinese takeout boxes. That rules. Get that one. That one's awesome. So yeah, I think those kind of decorations that like reference the very either they're like very kind of, oh my God, that's like overtly the opposite, or celebrate something absolutely not related to the Christmasness of Christmas, but like to random social forces that like Chinese restaurants are just open on Christmas, you know, like that. Those are great decorations, I think.
You could also go to Walmart and spend $5 on a small Baby Yoda action figure and just put him in a nativity scene.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that wins.
Let's go to Devin Rubnik, who asks, now that it's on tape, will the Vikings eventually run a direct snap play in which Kirk lines up under the right guard instead of the center?
So I think that now that it's happened, I think it's in the brains of opposing teams that the Vikings could conceivably do this. And so if the Vikings do it again, I think the way teams, whether or not it's true, but I think the way teams will respond is, yeah, no way is he doing it accidentally this time. They're doing it because we think that he'll do it on accident because he was so discombobulated to do it the other time. So we'll just think it's an accident, and then they'll direct snap it. So they know that I know that they did it, so I'm going to anticipate them running a trick play. You know, that's sort of like reverse. So I don't think it would work, right? Whether or not the Vikings actually do line up like that again, which, you know, who knows? But like, I don't think it might work next year, but definitely not this year. I think teams will be too on notice to be like, hey, last time was definitely a mistake, but you're just doing this to make us think it's a mistake. I'm more interested in whether or not the Vikings are going to try a third attempt at a Kenny Nwangu fake punt run. Like, so they actually ran it once. They were called for, what was it, a false start or an illegal formation?
No, they were called because the ref wasn't set.
Oh God, yeah, that. Okay,
That's what
yeah,
that
that was
was.
God awful. Okay, and he even signaled. Okay, anyway, so yeah, so they couldn't do it that second time. I think they'll still try it again. Like, I think, hey, this team oversets to one side, so we're just gonna run Wangu to the other side. I think we'll see more of those, even though the Vikings have already put it on tape. But I think a direct snap to the running back where Kirk lines up somewhere else, possible, but I don't think it's going to be a right guard. Kirk is just lining up under the wrong guy. Which, by the way, like, well, I'll talk about it when we get to Don's question.
Unimportant asks, Vikings have lost by 1, 3, 4, 7, and 8. Do you think it's possible to manage for the Vikings to lose by 2, 5, and 6, thereby having every one-score loss possible? Seems tough with only 6 games left, but all things are possible through Ben DiNucci.
All things are possible through Ben DiNucci. Yeah, I think for sure. I mean, the Vikings have had games where they've been behind by 2, 5, or 6. So being able to end games like that, yeah, in the cards.
Next question is going to be from Jesse from New York, who says, "Who are you guys planning on rooting for in the new USFL? I think I'm going to be a New Orleans Breakers fan. Pick your teams now because I don't want any bandwagon fans or bandwagon Breakers fans when we win the championship." I'm going with the Pittsburgh Maulers personally.
That's a good name. I really like the Breakers name. That's a really great name. I'm going to go with the Tampa Bay Bandits first because they seemed super fun in the original USFL material. Second, because Burt Reynolds ran it. That seems like a great reason. Also, that's a great name. I'm glad they kept it. So yeah, I'm a Tampa Bay Bandits fan. I feel like I'm almost for sure going to change my mind when I find out who's playing for some of these teams, but right now, I'm a Tampa Bay Bandits guy. And also, all of them are only playing in Birmingham. They're called the New Jersey Generals, the Tampa Bay Bandits, the Michigan Panthers. That's the only bad name of the bunch, by the way. I don't love Philadelphia Stars, but the logo makes up for it. The rest of the names are really excellent, which makes sense because a lot of them are basically the USFL names from the original league in the 1980s. But the Gamblers, great name, but Michigan Panthers is just, I don't like it. It's there's too many teams named after Wildcats anyway. So yeah, I once we find out who's on, I might change my mind, but right now, Tampa Bay Bandits.
I believe, and I could be wrong here, but I believe these were the original 8 teams, weren't they?
Yeah, I think that they're the 8 original teams from
the 8 original
USFL,
team names.
so.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, okay. But yeah, they're all playing in Birmingham. They're not in Michigan. They're not in New Jersey. They're all playing in Birmingham.
No. Also from Jesse, bar none here in New York just got seized by the IRS for non-payment of taxes. Not even a little surprised. But tell me how it was the passive-aggressive DJ's fault, or more appropriately, how can we blame the passive-aggressive DJ? Those who might be newer listeners to the show, bar none in New York is where we did our New York live show. It's also where we fought a DJ when the DJ and us, we were double booked that night. And so we were dealing with a DJ who kept increasing the level of the music as our hour-plus show went on. And it was frustrating at the time, but it was hilarious after the fact. So how can we blame this on the passive-aggressive DJ? It's pretty simple. We've been talking about the passive-aggressive DJ thing from bar none for years now. And eventually enough people have heard the story of this so that they decided they didn't want to book their events or go out to bar none as a result of the passive-aggressive DJ. It ended up, our appearance there ended up kind of backfiring because of our experience with the passive-aggressive DJ. So you could point directly to the passive-aggressive DJ as the reason why the bar ended up going under. I
will say...
Oh, go for it.
Yeah, sure. I'll say this. I think an alternate explanation for how the passive-aggressive DJ is directly responsible for this is They were not double booked through any fault of their own. The DJ wanted to book that night, found out it was booked, couldn't believe it, broke into the bar, and went through all of their kind of scheduling and all of their forms and accounting and all the stuff that they use to kind of run a business. Which it's kind of embarrassing. I couldn't come up with the words for like spreadsheets, but he goes into their documents and changes it so that they're not double booked, so he can book it, and then in the process has them lose tax forms, lose accountancy information, files things to the wrong area. So him breaking in so that he could DJ over us is directly the reason that Bar None couldn't pay their taxes.
Also an acceptable answer. The biggest thing to me about Bar None closing is that was such a... The shirts, the I Heart, or the I Vike New York shirt is still so awesome. And thank you, Damien, for getting me another one once my... once my old one got ruined in the laundry. But like, I will always treasure the I Vike New York shirt that we got there. Also because the fans at the Jets game were like, "Where on earth did you get that? That is amazing." It was a truly awesome thing. So it's too bad that they've all gone, or that the bar has been seized.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. That sucks.
Don from Ohio asks, "Are you surprised that Kirk Cousins is a right guard type of guy? I saw him more as a Old Spice or Degree."
I feel like he might have been a Degree guy, but after all of the controversy surrounding Garrett Bradbury's sweaty behind, I'm trying to make it iTunes friendly.
He had concerns about butt sweat. That is something that had come up.
Yeah, so butt sweat came up a surprising amount of times this rookie year. I think that Kirk Cousins was like, "Yeah, I get like my current deodorant's not working. I'm a right guard guy." Also, one of the best tweets I saw was from the Stephen Ruiz on Twitter.
Not the one being told to cooperate with authorities.
Yeah, that's right. No, the Stephen Ruiz is his @ his tweet about Cousins at lining up under Oli Udoh was Kirk was always straying a little too far right. That's just, interpret that however you want.
I don't know. I look at Kirk Cousins and I think he's a Mitchum man, which always felt like slime to me. And if you wear it, fine, but I never liked it for me. But it always just, he looks like a Mitchum man to me. Don from Ohio also asks, finally, "Dear Arif, my Ohio State University somehow lost to a team in Michigan this past weekend. I don't think this has ever happened before. I know your James Madison has never lost to their rivals at NDSU. From one powerhouse school to another, should I be worried this might happen again, or just chalk it up as an aberration and let them enjoy their college football national championship game win?"
You know that Don is in a bad spot because he actually used the letter M in Michigan when he sent this question in. He's dealing with a lot right now. Don't want to, kick him when he's down. So I'll just say, Don, you're correct. James Madison has never lost to the rivals at NDSU. That is an accurate statement. And so from one powerhouse school to another, should you be worried that it happens again? Again, I wouldn't know because it hasn't happened to James Madison. But I would say that it is very likely that Michigan does not maintain that level of competitiveness against Ohio State. But also, like, if it does, I'm not sad. I don't care.
I enjoyed Ted Glover's tweet about after the game where he said he was going to go cheer up by watching Rosemary's Baby. Ted,
that's great.
That's great. Ted did not enjoy that. By the way, we are, if everything goes the way it's supposed to, if JMU ends up winning out and NDSU ends up winning out, we may try to do something in Fargo simply because it'll be JMU versus NDSU in Fargo.
Yeah, like a 4-hour drive away, right?
Three-ish from you, depending on the road construction. But yeah, we may try to accomplish something over at the game simply because of Eric Thompson's involvement in NDSU, and that could be pretty damn hilarious. So let's we'll give you an update on that next week after JMU wins. But we'll see what the rest of December looks like. That'd be like the weekend before Christmas, so we'll see. But Reef, we are at the end of this episode of Norse Code. What do you have to plug?
So I've got 2 pieces, I think, at The Athletic coming up tomorrow. So one is that Kirk Cousins piece I mentioned that kind of recaps a bit of the 49ers game. The other one I don't think I can disclose. It's like a site-wide thing. So like I think all 32 teams are going to be publishing a piece at the same time, and this will be one of them. So that'll be fun. And then later on this week, I'm going to be writing about how there aren't any good teams. I think I don't know what my next assignment at The Athletic is. That we'll all find out together. How about that? Find that out at theathletic.com/author/Arif-Hassan. The Black Friday deal is over, unfortunately, but still, I would love to get paid. So please sign up through my website.
And that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. Again, if you are a subscriber on Patreon, you can join me and potentially Arif over on Zoom. You can join us over at Patreon, and we'll get the Zoom link up there to watch the Lions game. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember, case cookus. And we'll be back later this week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at ArifHassanNFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to